In a war, it is natural that there are losses and sacrifice. Our people are determined to fight on. We will endure all sacrifice for 10 years, 20 years, or longer until complete victory.
Throughout Vietnam's history, this has always been the case. It was so in the past, it will be so in the future. This is something we can be sure of.
One of the most essential, if not to say the most essential rule in Vietnamese military science. In war, we have to win. Absolutely. Have to win.
In October 1954, after 9 years of conflict, French forces departed Hanoi. Ho Chi Minh had led the communist-influenced Viet Minh nationalists to success. A truce, signed at Geneva, temporarily divided Vietnam into two regions. Ho's troops would gather in the north, leaving behind families and unarmed allies in the south. A countrywide vote to reunite Vietnam was scheduled in 2 years. Colonial domination was concluding.
The northern part of the country had been totally liberated. According to the agreement, in only 2 more years, the South, too, would be completely liberated. The people in the South truly believed that there would be national reunification in 2 years.
The U.S., which had mostly funded the French war effort, vowed not to violate the Geneva terms with force. Vice President Nixon traveled to Saigon to highlight American backing of South Vietnam's new head, Ngo Dinh Diem, who had fixed a referendum and formed an independent southern regime.
After the Geneva Conference, the United States pushed the French out of the South and backed Ngo Dinh Diem to organize a government there. Ngo Dinh Diem was a cruel and reactionary tyrant. He used extremely barbaric methods to repress the revolutionary movement and to stifle demands that the Geneva Agreements be carried out.
The Eisenhower team supported Diem's refusal of the Geneva-mandated elections. With U.S. help and advisors, Diem consolidated control through ex-French troops and police.
They arrested, imprisoned, and assassinated former participants of the resistance against the French, and they forcibly registered all families whose sons, husbands, and other relatives had regrouped in the north.
While I was in the north, I heard that people in the south were being killed in droves. Among them, members of my family. I was very worried, and my heart ached for them. I went to my superiors and volunteered to return to the South to fight in any way I could.
Ho Chi Minh preferred a peaceful solution. So did the Soviets and Chinese, who dreaded potential war with America, and the USSR favored a peaceful path. Widespread rural poverty was visible everywhere. 10 years earlier, a northern famine had claimed an estimated 2 million lives. Increasing food output became a top concern. Hanoi's leaders began a land reform effort aimed at helping peasants. Rural landlords' properties were divided among nearly 3/4 of the peasants. The political goal was to eliminate the power of the former landowning elite.
A land reform team came from the central government to coordinate the program with the local inhabitants. The people in the area would then be invited to meetings where the poor and landless peasants would describe their situation. In this way, we found out how the rich exploited the poor and landless peasants.
khổ xong ấy, thì chúng tôi đã xã.
With help from the government team, we classified the landlords in different categories.
Dân địa phương đã phân loại được các loại cái địa chủ
Then the
gia.
landlords were brought before a people's court set up in the village.
Sau khi đưa lên tòa án nhân dân ở xã thành lập ấy,
Those found guilty of actual crimes were sent to jail.
Có tội thì phải đi tù.
Adopting Chinese communist methods, people's courts had to fulfill set quotas of guilty landlords. Thousands of innocent individuals were detained, and many, possibly 3,000 to 15,000, were put to death. Disturbed by the chaos, the government restrained the abuses, labeling them grave errors. The northern economy, damaged by conflict and abandonment, was under reconstruction. Pressure on Hanoi grew from Southerners urging renewed conflict. In 1959, they ultimately chose to support armed rebellion in the South.
Đầu tiên chúng tôi đánh ở Định Thủy là đánh một cái đội quân là
The first battle took place in Ben Tre province. We attacked a company of the regime's self-defense forces and took over a notorious police garrison. In only 3 hours, without any weapons of our own, we succeeded in capturing 30 guns.
30 cây súng.
In 1960, the Communist Party formed the National Liberation Front, a group of Southern elements opposed to Diem's rule. Diem referred to it as the Viet Cong. The front demanded Diem's removal, an end to foreign involvement, and Vietnam's peaceful reunification. The U.S. responded by increasing aid and sending more advisors.
We continually were amazed at the professionalism, the ability to be good psychologists that these people had. They knew exactly how to deal with the Vietnamese farmer. Now this, the Americans generally never did, and the Vietnamese government might have, but really wasn't that interested. So we found that a whole structure had been superimposed on this province, and it was a Viet Cong structure, a communist Viet Cong structure. They had people at every level, and they were running a shadow government, coincidentally with the government's operation.
To cut off Viet Cong influence, Diem relocated villagers into guarded communities called strategic hamlets. Many villagers disliked the return of landlords and losing land once granted by the Viet Minh.
There were some very substantial grievances, which these people had. They had been perhaps moved off their land. They were being taxed unfairly. They were promised things which were never delivered. The Vietnamese military would perhaps molest their women, would steal their chickens, in general be obnoxious.
Saigon's regime attempted to dominate the countryside, while Viet Cong squads killed local leaders.
They would send in a small squad of people, maybe 5 or 6 men in the middle of the night. They would seize the hamlet chief in his house, haul him out to the center of the hamlet, and convene the whole village to watch this. And then they would cut his head off. They would make him kneel down and they would shoot him in the head, whatever technique they wanted to use. And of course, this frightened the Vietnamese. Because of the insecurity in the countryside, the normal Vietnamese government civil servant, the teachers, the agricultural advisors, could not go into these hamlets. The provincial junkyard was littered with blown up ambulances, blown up education vehicles. They simply put mines in the road, and as the government people went out to a hamlet, the Viet Cong destroyed them, and they put the fear of God in them.
Government forces swept rural regions seeking suspected Viet Cong. Viet Cong ranks expanded. Their goals included seizing outposts and destroying hamlets. Diem's military struggled with weak leadership and internal division. In late 1963, the U.S. supported a coup during which Diem was killed by his own officers. At first, the Viet Cong relied on seized or improvised weapons and arms hidden after the Geneva Accords. But in early 1964, as northern involvement grew, troops and gear moved south via the Ho Chi Minh Trail. Veteran Viet Minh fighters who had regrouped up north were now returning to combat, They relied on rising backing from the southern people. Intensifying sabotage, they hit central Saigon, targeting American bases.
Trong quá trình hoạt động ở đó, thì tôi sẽ nắm tình hình toàn bộ các.
When I worked on the docks, I collected information on American facilities, on all their ships and their military warehouses.
Mang cái tính chất là quân sự. Sau khi là
I learned that the USS Card was coming up the river, carrying all kinds of aircraft to kill the Vietnamese people.
Nhân dân Việt Nam biến cái căm thù đó thành hành động.
I was able to transform my anger into action when I was given the job of trying to blow up the ship.
Hạm của Mỹ, tôi với một đồng chí nữa mới mang trái dùng kỹ thuật đặc công.
Using commando tactics, we entered into a sewer,
Trong cái đường cống đó,
crawling along because it was so
có những cái
narrow.
chỗ thì nó lớn, có những cái chỗ nó nhỏ.
Sometimes we could walk by crouching.
Khom gì được, có những cái lúc là phải bò. Sau khi đặt xong rồi thì
After we had placed the two mines, I checked the automatic ignition device again.
trong lúc mà
It was 2 a.m. when I finished checking everything. My comrade and I then began to crawl back to the other end of the sewage system.
giờ là trái phát nổ lên. Thì lúc phát nổ là
When the mines exploded at exactly 3 a.m.,
điện tắt.
the whole area was blacked
Thì
out,
một cái tiếng nổ dữ dội.
and the two of us were so
làm cho
happy
là anh em chúng
knowing
tôi
that our
rất
mission
là
had been
phấn khởi.
accomplished.
Coi như là cái trận đánh là thành công.
In August 1964, President Johnson answered reports of a naval incident in the Gulf of Tonkin with a retaliatory airstrike.
Renewed hostile actions against United States ships on the high seas in the Gulf of Tonkin have today required me to take action in reply.
U.S. aircraft were bombing North Vietnam for the first time.
Not until I was about halfway to our target area did I start to realize that this was actual combat. And things that we had trained and prepared for, the eventuality like this, I never really, thought that it would really actually happen. But all of a sudden, here we were, and I was in it.
1964.
I was visiting Quang Ninh province when suddenly I saw a formation of airplanes coming from the sea,
Tôi thấy một cái đội máy bay từ ngoài
flying
khơi
straight
bay
toward the
vào
mining area.
vùng mỏ. Tiếp sau đó là có cuộc đánh nhau.
Then, a fight broke out between the American airplanes and the Vietnamese air defenses.
Và phòng không Việt Nam.
I was hit, and the weirdest feeling. My airplane started to fall apart. I was over strange territory, foreign territory, enemy territory.
Thì sau đó máy bay Mỹ bị hạ.
Shortly thereafter, an American airplane was shot down and its pilot captured.
Và chúng tôi
Before returning to Hanoi, I met with this pilot, Everett Alvarez.
tên là Everett Alvarez. Đó là người giặc lái đầu tiên.
He was the first American pilot taken prisoner in Vietnam.
A decade after Geneva, North Vietnam came under fire. Its emerging economy was endangered. Over 10 years, the amount of irrigated land had doubled. Electricity output had risen by a factor of 10. In 1964, Ho Chi Minh, who had spent his life fighting for freedom, stated, "While our nation remains split and our people still suffer, I find no rest or appetite." Ho symbolized the patriotic fight, even to those uneasy about communism. He motivated many in the South to take up arms.
Thì tôi còn nhớ mãi là ngày 1 tháng 8.
I'll always remember August 1st, 1964, when this village liberated itself. There were no revolutionary guerrillas or regular forces present. Villagers staged a spontaneous uprising. We were delighted. We convened a meeting of 2,000 people and introduced a revolutionary administration. We organized the people to dig trenches and tunnels to defend themselves against enemy artillery. Everyone dug booby traps and laid homemade mines. We knew that the enemy puppet troops would try to get revenge.
The Saigon government troops faced traps and other primitive weapons.
The People's Liberation Army, military wing of the front, used experience from fighting France and focused intensely on organization and tactics. U.S. helicopters had given South Vietnam faster movement. So, their opponents formed new strategies to draw helicopters into kill zones. By late 1964, Viet Cong units were engaging larger, better-equipped South Vietnamese forces. On December 28th, about 1,500 Viet Cong with heavy weapons seized Bin Gia, 40 miles from Saigon. On December 30th, after U.S. airlifted reinforcements, Saigon troops regained the village. Fighting dragged on for 5 days. The Viet Cong wiped out 2 South Vietnamese battalions, killing 158 troops and 5 U.S. advisors. By March 1965, U.S. Marines had landed in Vietnam, the first American combat forces to arrive. They came as South Vietnam's allies, but many peasants saw them as just another foreign threat. Bien Hoa, March 18th, 1965. The U.S. intensified bombings in the south, deploying more napalm and phosphorus munitions.
Vũ khí mà đến Mỹ đó, đa số là vũ khí tự tạo.
Unexploded American bombs and shells were dug up by the old people and the kids, sawed up in order to get to the gunpowder and explosives.
Ở trong xóm đó, kể cả những người giàu và thanh niên đều đi tìm và đào nó lên. Đào nó lên rồi mới cưa ra.
They then produced various kinds of explosive devices themselves. In each hamlet and village, we had a workshop for producing these devices.
Những cái loại trái nổ.
We unscrewed the detonators first of all, then used a saw to cut the bombs in half. We scraped the powder into 2 large cauldrons bigger than this one here. Next, we melted the powder down into a thick liquid and poured it into a container like this one, until it was completely full. We then made a detonator and inserted it here. We placed these mines along the routes we knew the tanks were going to take. When the tanks went by, they would hit this thing here, exploding the mine and causing the tank to turn over.
We had many old people who took part in the fighting. Have you heard of Mrs. Nguyen Thi Ran, who was over 80 years old when she became a military heroine? We had many men and women who were more than 50 years old when they became heroes and heroines in the struggle against the United States. The children were even more active and creative. They mostly used homemade weapons, manufactured precisely to fight the enemy in each area.
American airstrikes had been hitting South Vietnam since 1961. Vinh Binh Province, April 26, 1965. On July 1st, the Viet Cong shelled the U.S. airbase at Da Nang. American Marines moved into nearby Cam Nay, a hamlet cluster. They came under fire.
As we started moving, some of the so-called civilians, quote unquote, as is on the news, got killed. At this time, some of the Marines used cigarette lighters, and the hooches went up, grenades. Some flamethrowers were brought in, and that was one way to quell the fire from the village.
I told the squatters to approach it on simply a case-by-case basis and use their own judgment, that we were not getting a heavy volume of fire, that they should be able to pinpoint, at least to some extent, the source of the fire.
I don't think that an order had come down to burn the village, but I think it was just something that was carried on through the operation.
The Americans shelled the village as they arrived. Then they burned down the houses, destroying everything. 9 members of my family were killed. I escaped, which is why I'm alive today. But my whole family was wiped out.
Many people were wounded. Where I'm sitting now, one person was shot as she returned from harvesting rice. She was taken to hospital, and there she died.
The Americans came into my house with their interpreters and drove us out. They refused to let us take any belongings with us.
An 8-year-old or a 9-year-old can kill you just as quick as a 25 or a 26-year-old man. Now, these people have been fighting this war a long, long time. Some of these people were actually fighting wars when they were 9, 10, and 11 years old, where back here in the States, the kids are playing cowboys and Indians. Over there, they've been playing it for real.
We did encounter a problem which was ultimately to become a very difficult situation, in that I'd gotten a report from one of my squads that they had been fired on from behind. It meant either that our search was not sufficiently adequate, or that we were facing some other kind of a problem. And perhaps they'd come from some other area of the village and come in behind us or whatever.
I witnessed the destruction because I was fighting there. After our clash with the Americans, my comrades and I ran along the communication trenches to our hidden shelters, where the villagers could help us.
Wherever the Americans went, they burned and destroyed and killed. I didn't see any guerrillas being killed, only villagers.
On that day, they couldn't locate any of us guerrilla fighters. Our unit suffered no casualties at all.
In North Vietnam, locals and militias were now enduring frequent American air raids. Known as Operation Rolling Thunder, the campaign began in March 1965. Initially planned to last weeks or a few months, the bombing stretched beyond 3 years.
I was going right up Route 1, north from Thanh Hoa. I had to raise up to go over the hill just a little, and when I did, I was receiving automatic weapons fire right down my nose from some fixed positions, and I never quite even reached my target, and they just shot me to pieces.
Targets extended beyond military bases and radar outposts to roads, bridges, trains, and any object resembling a combat vehicle.
When my head emerged above the rice, in the rice paddy, I looked right down a gun bore. And I didn't have my gun aimed at this guy, so I had to make the decision. Am I going to make a fight? Because this guy was already had a gun right in my head. And I changed my mind. I remember telling the guys I would never be captured, but I changed my mind and I dropped the gun without uncocking it. I ground it in the mud with my feet, hoping they wouldn't find it. But an old one-eyed villager had seen me with it, saw me drop it. He came up, and while they were forcing me to kneel and tie my arms very painfully behind me, he searched around until he found it. And then he picked it up, and I remember still the water and the mud dripping from it. And he put the barrel between my eyes, and I watched his finger as almost as though I were fascinated or hypnotized, and I watched his finger curl around the trigger guard, knowing full well he didn't know how finely tuned that trigger was. And that was the only time out of my entire prison career that I ever wondered for even a millisecond if I were coming back alive or not.
In South Vietnam, American planes faced lighter defenses.
Okay, it's about their SimCom. Okay, they should hit now. Zip up now. There it goes. Ah, look at it burn. Look at it burn.
Operations also focused on collecting intelligence.
I got to turn them over around, please.
The American imperialists have invaded the South with their troops and have tried to destroy the North with their aircraft. Thus, they have committed untold crimes against the people of both regions. Vietnam is one. The Vietnamese people are one. As compatriots, the people in the North will do everything within their power to support the struggle of the people in the South.
While transporting troops and material, Hanoi's officials kept denying their army was active in the South, labeling U.S. claims as fabrications. To disrupt these movements, America escalated its air attacks. North Vietnam answered by relocating factories into remote areas. Though civilians suffered economically, the nation mobilized behind Ho Chi Minh's rallying cry. Nothing is more precious than independence and freedom. Previously, Ho's communist partners had resisted his drive to reunify the nation. In 1957, the USSR even recommended both Vietnams be admitted into the UN. But as the North came under fire, aid from allies surged, sending weapons, fuel, rice, farming, and industrial tools.
We received help from sister countries, from the USSR, from China, which had a stand different from the one she has now. Not only did we enjoy growing international help and support from other socialist nations, but also from the progressive forces in all other countries.
As the bombs were falling, our hearts naturally throbbed with fear. But when that happened, we either carried the stretcher out to bring in the wounded or went out to visit the injured, and our fear dissipated as a result. My experience was that fear arose when you sat there worrying about things. But when you kept yourselves occupied, you lost your fear.
Despite resource shortages, doctors in the north grew skilled at treating burn wounds and removing bomb fragments. North Vietnamese labeled captured U.S. pilots as war criminals.
One evening of July the 6th, they came around and gave us new pajamas that we wore. And these had numbers stamped, or they had stamped numbers on our pajamas. We were always so hopeful and optimistic that this thing was going to end, and we figured, aha, this is step number one, and we're going to be going home, guys. So we were sort of feeling good about this. And as we started walking, I thought really we were going to walk right around the park. But no, as we got to the opening of a big street, we could see down, and it was just, this was the New Year's Eve parade. There's just thousands of people, and in stands and along the streets. And as we started the march, I could hear the cheerleaders with megaphones getting the crowd going. And one of the interrogators we call the Rabbit, he saw me, and he turned to the crowd, and he was leading them in this cheer. The cheer said, "Alvarez, Alvarez, son of a bitch, son of a bitch." So pretty soon the whole cheering section started, and I had played sports before, but this was a different sport altogether. But as we progressed down, the crowd started to press in. And the guards would come along, and the interrogator would say, bow to the people, bow to the people. I was sort of just trying to keep my head, not to bow, but just trying to head in that direction. And after a few blocks of this, the crowds became uncontrollable, and they started throwing things. And then somebody hit me from behind, and I just about went out. Next thing I know, I was sort of drowsy, and we were led to the infield, and sat there, and as they brought us all in, we all made it.
They started with my wrists, with my arms behind my back, and wrapped my arms together under the armpits. Well, the two arms were together, and they just pulled my shoulders out of joint. There wasn't that, and then they did some similar things to my legs. I tried to endure the pain, knowing that an American military man should be able to endure torture until he died, but never to give nothing to the enemy, and never to give anything to the enemy. And I tried my best, and my best wasn't good enough. And during the night, I heard someone screaming in a distance. And I thought, man, they're torturing another prisoner. And I felt so sorry for him, And then I would come back more closely to consciousness and found out it was me I was hearing in the distance. I was the one that was doing the screaming. And they tortured me all night. And by daylight, they had reduced me to such a place that I would give them more than name, rank, soul number, date of birth. And they hurt me pretty bad. They pulled my shoulders out of joint, and they did some things to my legs. But I found out that I was not as strong as I thought. I couldn't be tortured to death, that my will would give before my heart stopped beating. That was very disconcerting. I lived in abject misery for the rest of the time I was a prisoner.
Southern bombings went on continuously, yet failed to block supplies and fighters from reaching Viet Cong strongholds. Many of these bases lay in tunnels, stretching for hundreds of yards. Some, like Cuchi, just 20 miles from Saigon, remained intact.
Thế thì chúng tôi ở tại đất Cuchi
We used Cuchi as a training base and staging area.
tổ chức cái lực lượng.
We enlisted recruits in Saigon and trained them here in the tunnels.
Chúng tôi phải huấn luyện ở dưới địa đạo để anh em có
We raised their political consciousness and taught them tactical skills, preparing them for big assignments, such as attacking large enemy hotels.
Ví dụ như đánh những khách sạn lớn của địch.
They learned to use automobiles and Honda motorcycles, firing handguns to hit the enemy with a single shot.
Trúng ngay kẻ thù. Thế chúng tôi hoạt động trong thành phố đó.
In the city, we had people who specialized in forging documents. Whenever the enemy produced any kind of document, we were always able to acquire a copy and produce an exact replica right in the heart of Saigon itself.
Ngay trong Sài Gòn.
Tôi là những người ở trong thành phố Đà Nẵng.
I lived in Da Nang along with other sisters who participated in the revolution.
Yêu nước, tham gia cách mạng.
We organized clandestine activities and provided communication between the revolutionary base area and the city. We carried out political struggles against the enemy.
Và đấu tranh với địch.
Viet Cong informants steadily funneled intelligence to the guerrilla network. Messengers and saboteurs relied on support from local civilians for their safety. If captured, they expected harsh punishment.
They tried to force me to confess that I was involved with the Viet Cong. I refused to make such a statement, and so they stuck needles under the tips of my 10 fingernails, saying that if I did not write down what they wanted and admit to being Viet Cong, then they would continue the torture.
Đâm mở trên ngón tay này, buộc là phải viết, phải chịu là việc cảm VC thì mới được.
But I was determined to say nothing. I was extremely angry at the enemy, and I loved my country so much. This was because everyday bombs and shells and the blood and bones of my people appeared before my eyes. I was extremely outraged and would never come out with any information. They tied my nipples to electric wires, then gave me electric shocks, knocking me to the floor every time they did so. They said if they did not get the necessary information, they would continue with the torture. 2 American advisors were always standing on either side of me.
Painters, authors, and musicians rallied behind the National Liberation Front, whose broadcasts spread propaganda to Saigon and nearby regions. Countless performers, filmmakers, poets, dancers, and vocalists joined the resistance against the Americans and the Saigon regime. Southern coastal settlements in North Vietnam faced non-stop bombing and shelling by U.S. aircraft and naval guns. Residents hid in underground shelters.
We spent more than 2 years building the whole complex. The largest number of people living in the tunnel at any one time was more than 1,000. The lowest number was more than 200.
My house had been bombed, and I had to give birth to my baby in the tunnel. We remained underground for 2 months. There was little food to eat or clothes to wear. There was no firewood to cook with, and little water to drink. All day long, I was going in and out of the tunnel trying to get water for my child.
They dropped napalm bombs and I was injured. Napalm bombs saturated the whole village, engulfing it in a gigantic fire. When I was hit, the napalm set my whole body on fire. I lost consciousness. Many people died. Their bodies had been torn to pieces. Some of the pieces hung from the branches of trees, and other pieces were covered with dirt thrown up by the explosion. Some people were so shocked by the terrifying scene that they turned around and went back into the tunnel. But then the tunnel collapsed, and they were buried alive.
B-52 bombers started striking the South in June 1965. By April 1966, raids extended to the north.
L'aviation américaine est une aviation très puissante.
The American Air Force is a very powerful Air Force, and naturally it influenced the battlefield.
Les Américains,
It was a great trump card. The Americans counted on their Air Force to somehow change the course of events.
Le cours des événements.
Ở đây cần nhắc lại một lời nói của tướng, của Chúa Suleiman.
It must not be forgotten that General Curtis LeMay had said that the United States should bomb Vietnam back into the Stone Age.
Nhưng rõ ràng là họ đã nhầm
But they were greatly mistaken. The destruction of the North, with all the efforts and all the barbarity of Imperial America, only caused the people to be more resilient, more resolute, and their determination to resist and to win.
Để chống lại và chiến thắng. Cái điều có ý nghĩa quyết định là chúng tôi.
The key factor in the struggle was the opening up of a trail, appropriately called the Ho Chi Minh Trail, to link the North to the South.
Nối liền miền Bắc với miền Nam. Và tất nhiên là
the United States used every means at its disposal to block the trail, but to no avail.
Nhưng mà tất cả thủ đoạn này đều đã thất
The
bại.
Ho Chi Minh Trail developed day by day, becoming a network of roads over which weapons, military supplies, and tens of thousands of soldiers were moved into the South for combat.
Chiến sĩ đi chiến đấu ở miền Nam.
Thế mà vào đến trong đó thì phải
I left the North, taking 3 months to reach the South.
gần 3 tháng thì vào đến trong.
On the way, we constantly faced flares, all kinds of bombs and rockets.
Bom thả, rồi chúng dùng máy bay.
We couldn't stop for any time along the route until we had reached our resting place.
Thế đi thì là dọc đường chúng tôi là mưa, gió, rét, đi đến đâu mà theo quy định thì ở đấy đó căng võng nằm.
Then we would sleep in hammocks
ở trên mắc ở rừng
and begin marching again at 4 o'clock the next morning.
Đêm đó được, xong rồi đến sáng là 4 giờ sáng chúng tôi lại dậy tiếp tục.
The Ho Chi Minh Trail was a vast network, reaching into Laos and Cambodia. Women, often conscripted for 2 years, worked to maintain it. In 1967, increasing numbers of troops moved monthly from north to south.
Và họ cũng hiểu rằng
The Northern brothers came here to fight because of their sense of solidarity and responsibility toward us. After all, this was not their native village, and they did not have to fight here. There were never any problems between us Southerners and Northerners. We guerrillas fought behind the enemy lines, disrupting his rear. We concluded that only with the regular forces would we be able to fight the big battles.
North Vietnamese soldiers followed strict discipline and control. Like China's Communist Army, each belonged to a group of 3.
When we encountered difficulties, the 3-man cell functioned as one. If one of us was killed, the others suffered terribly. And that made us hate the American imperialists even more.
The morale of the South Vietnamese soldiers was not very high. This was because they were only mercenaries, afraid to die.
The Army of South Vietnam, scorned by the Viet Cong and North Vietnamese as mere puppets, regularly suffered greater losses than U.S. forces.
In combat, we found it easier to fight Americans than the puppet troops. Besides being rather naive and clumsy, the Americans were well disciplined. They would not open fire until they received orders.
I killed 3 American soldiers when the American forces attacked Diem Hang. We waited for them in ambush. We engaged them in close combat, and I killed them with my bayonet. After this battle, my morale was very high because I had contributed to the liberation of the South.
We had a slogan: to fight the Americans, you must cling to their belts. If we fought them at a distance, we suffered a lot of casualties. Having fought against American troops many times, I came to the conclusion that they had a lot of bombs and shells, that they were very powerful as far as war materials were concerned. But they did not fight very well at all. They moved very slowly and really were not that mobile.
In both Vietnams, everyday routines adapted to the demands of war.
We always knew when they were about to drop their bombs. For example, in the morning, they usually arrived about 10 o'clock, just after breakfast. Then they took a break and went back to their bases for lunch. Then they came back to drop their bombs again at about 3 in the afternoon. Since this was the routine, we tailored our schedule accordingly. We began our surgery about 5 in the morning and took a break at 9 or 10. When the bombs didn't fall on time, we felt extremely uncomfortable, wondering why they hadn't fallen yet. This wasn't fear. We simply wanted the bombing to be over with so that we could get back to our work.
By 1968, Hanoi was encircled with Soviet-supplied missiles and anti-aircraft defenses.
At that time, we were filled with fervor. I can tell you, there's something strange about the Vietnamese. They could never remain long in a bomb shelter. Whenever an airplane was shot down, everybody, including doctors, rushed out to look at it.
By 1967, nearly all northern military sites had been hit or wrecked. Yet the bombings failed to shatter morale or halt the southern supply lines. Operation Rolling Thunder was unsuccessful.
They had spread the hostilities over the entire territory of our country. It was absolutely normal and necessary for us to mobilize all our forces, political and military, in order to carry on the struggle and to reach final victory.
In January 1968, 20,000 northern fighters advanced south, ready for the bold Tet Offensive.